Sarah Thompson had always dreamed of a place where she could escape the noise and chaos of city life. After years of saving and searching, she finally found it. A cozy home tucked away in a quiet suburban neighborhood, surrounded by lush greenery and rolling hills. But what made this property truly special was its most prized feature, a sparkling private lake nestled at the edge of her backyard. The moment Sarah first laid eyes on it, she knew she'd found her sanctuary. The lake wasn't huge, but it was perfect. Its crystal-clear waters reflected the sky during the day and shimmered under the moonlight at night. Ducks floated lazily across its surface, while fish darted beneath. It was peaceful, serene, and exactly what Sarah needed after long days working in the bustling city. She imagined mornings spent sipping coffee by the water, afternoons kayaking, and evenings watching fireflies dance above the gentle ripples. This wasn't just a house, it was her happy place. At first, everything seemed idyllic. Her neighbors were friendly enough, waving hello when they passed or exchanging pleasantries about the weather. The neighborhood even had a homeowners association, HOA, which Sarah initially thought would be helpful for organizing community events or maintaining shared spaces. Little did she know that one member of the HOA would soon turn her dream into a nightmare. Enter Karen Hargrove. Karen was the kind of person who thrived on control. She chaired the HOA meetings with an iron fist, dictating rules about everything from acceptable mailbox colors to how often residents should mow their lawns. To say she was particular would be an understatement. Karen took pride in micromanaging every detail of the neighborhood's appearance. While some people found her relentless energy annoying, others admired her dedication to keeping things orderly. But no one realized just how far Karen was willing to go until she set her sights on Sarah's lake. For weeks, everything was fine. Sarah enjoyed her new home without interference, relishing the solitude her little slice of paradise provided. Then came the letter. One afternoon, as Sarah sorted through her mail, she noticed an envelope bearing the HOA logo. Curious, she opened it and began reading. At first glance, the letter seemed harmless enough, just another update from the association. But as Sarah scanned further, her heart sank. The message claimed that the lake behind her house wasn't actually part of her private property. According to Karen, it belonged to the entire neighborhood and should be accessible to all residents. Sarah couldn't believe what she was reading. She had purchased the property outright, and the deed clearly stated that the lake was included within her boundaries. How could anyone think otherwise? Confused and frustrated, she decided to brush it off, assuming it must have been a simple misunderstanding. Surely, once Karen saw the legal documents proving Sarah's ownership, the matter would be resolved quickly. Or so she thought. What Sarah didn't realize yet was that Karen wasn't interested in facts or logic. For reasons unknown, the woman had become obsessed with gaining control over the lake, and she wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. What started as a minor disagreement over property lines would soon spiral into something far more sinister, testing Sarah's patience, courage, and determination in ways she never imagined. The letter from the HOA was just the beginning. At first, Sarah tried to brush it off as a harmless mistake. After all, the property documents were clear. Her deed explicitly stated that the lake was part of her land. She figured Karen must have misunderstood something and decided to address the issue directly. Picking up the phone, Sarah called Karen to explain the situation calmly. Karen answered on the second ring, her tone clipped and authoritative. Before Sarah could even finish explaining, Karen interrupted her, insisting that the lake was communal property. "It's for everyone," Karen said firmly, her voice laced with an unshakable certainty. "You can't just keep it to yourself." When Sarah pointed out the legal paperwork proving her ownership, Karen dismissed it outright. "Those documents are old," she snapped. "Things change, and besides, this is about fairness. Why should you get to hog the whole lake?" Sarah hung up, feeling more confused than angry. How could Karen be so adamant when the facts were right in front of her? Still, Sarah hoped that presenting the official records would settle the matter once and for all. She emailed copies of her deed and survey maps to Karen and the rest of the HOA board, confident that the evidence would speak for itself. Surely, they'd see reason. But instead of backing down, Karen doubled down. Within days, signs began appearing around the edges of Sarah's property. Bright yellow placards declared, "Community Lake Access. All residents welcome." Overnight, strangers started showing up at the lake. Some came to fish, others to picnic, and a few even brought paddleboards. Sarah watched in disbelief as groups of people trampled through her yard, leaving behind trash and disturbing the peaceful atmosphere she had worked so hard to create. When Sarah confronted Karen again, the woman only grew more aggressive. "This isn't your personal playground," Karen sneered during one heated exchange. "You're being selfish, Sarah. The neighborhood deserves to enjoy this space too." Despite Sarah's repeated pleas for them to respect her boundaries, Karen refused to listen. Instead, she rallied other neighbors to her cause, painting Sarah as someone who cared more about exclusivity than community spirit. Flyers appeared in mailboxes urging residents to stand up for their rights and demand access to the lake. It wasn't long before tensions boiled over. One afternoon, Sarah returned home to find a group of teenagers splashing in the shallows of the lake. Their loud music echoed across the water, shattering the tranquility. When Sarah politely asked them to leave, they laughed and told her Karen had given them permission. Frustrated but determined not to escalate the situation, Sarah retreated inside, wondering how things had spiraled so out of control. As the days passed, the invasion became relentless. Every time Sarah stepped outside, she saw new faces encroaching on her property. Neighbors who had once been friendly now avoided eye contact, either too intimidated by Karen's influence or unwilling to take sides. Even worse, Sarah noticed subtle acts of vandalism. A broken fence post here, graffiti scrawled on her mailbox there. It was clear that Karen's campaign wasn't just about gaining access to the lake. It was about intimidating Sarah into submission. Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah refused to back down. She knew she was in the right, and she wasn't about to let Karen bully her into giving up what was rightfully hers. But deep down, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this fight was far from over. If Karen was willing to go this far already, what might she do next? The thought sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. After all, sometimes standing your ground means preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah realized that Karen wasn't going to back down anytime soon. In fact, the situation was only getting worse. The signs declaring community lake access remained firmly planted on her property, and more neighbors began showing up uninvited, treating the lake like their own personal resort. Trash littered the shoreline. Picnic blankets were left behind, and the once pristine water now had an oily sheen from sunscreen and discarded food wrappers. Sarah felt like a stranger in her own home, powerless to stop the chaos unfolding around her. Determined to protect her rights, Sarah decided it was time to bring in reinforcements. She hired a lawyer who specialized in property disputes, hoping that legal intervention would finally put an end to Karen's antics. The lawyer reviewed all of Sarah's documents, her deed, survey maps, and even correspondence with the HOA, and assured her that the law was squarely on her side. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah sent a formal letter to Karen and the HOA board, demanding they cease their trespassing immediately or face legal consequences. But if Sarah thought this would scare Karen into submission, she was sorely mistaken. Instead of backing off, Karen grew even more emboldened. At the next HOA meeting, she stood up and delivered a fiery speech, accusing Sarah of being greedy and selfish. "She thinks she's better than us," Karen declared, pacing dramatically in front of the room. "She doesn't care about this community. All she cares about is keeping that lake for herself." Her words ignited murmurs of agreement among some attendees, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what to believe. Karen didn't stop there. She began spreading rumors around the neighborhood, portraying Sarah as someone who hoarded resources and refused to share. Flyers appeared in mailboxes claiming that Sarah was trying to steal the lake from the community. Some residents started avoiding Sarah altogether, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Others openly sided with Karen, egging her on in her crusade against Sarah. One neighbor even went so far as to post angry comments on social media, calling Sarah names and urging others to boycott her entirely. Frustrated but unwilling to give up, Sarah installed security cameras around her property. She needed proof, not just of the trespassing, but also of the vandalism that had become increasingly frequent. Broken fence posts, slashed tires, and graffiti sprayed on her mailbox were just a few examples of the damage being done. The cameras captured everything, including late-night visits from shadowy figures sneaking onto her land. Sarah forwarded the footage to her lawyer, who advised her to file a police report. But even then, Karen showed no signs of relenting. The tension reached a boiling point when Sarah discovered fresh tire tracks leading directly to the edge of her lake one morning. Someone had driven a vehicle right onto her property, leaving deep ruts in the ground and crushing plants along the shoreline. Enraged, Sarah confronted Karen later that day, demanding answers. Karen smirked, crossing her arms defiantly. "Maybe you should have thought twice before trying to keep something that belongs to everyone," she said smugly. "This isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot." For Sarah, the message was clear. Karen wasn't just fighting for access to the lake. She was determined to make Sarah's life miserable, until she gave in. What started as a simple disagreement over property lines had escalated into a full-blown war, dividing the neighborhood and turning Sarah's peaceful sanctuary into a battleground. As she stood there, staring at the destruction around her, Sarah knew she couldn't let Karen win. This was her home, her haven, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to protect it. It was a warm summer evening when everything changed. Sarah had finally found a moment of peace after weeks of relentless stress. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, and she decided to take advantage of the calm by sitting on her dock. The gentle lapping of the water against the shore was soothing, almost enough to make her forget the chaos that had consumed her life lately. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax, closing her eyes and breathing in the fresh air. But the tranquility didn't last long. As Sarah sat there, lost in thought, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush behind her. Her heart skipped a beat. Turning her head, she saw Karen emerge from the trees, flanked by two burly men carrying surveying equipment. They'd moved with purpose, ignoring Sarah completely as they marched toward the edge of the lake. Sarah stood up quickly, her pulse racing. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp but steady. Karen turned to face her, a smug grin spreading across her face. "We're here to mark the true boundary lines," she announced, gesturing to the men beside her. "This land belongs to the HOA, not you." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You've seen the documents," she shot back, stepping closer. "The lake is part of my property. You have no right to be here." Karen's smile faltered for a split second, but then it returned, colder and more calculated than before. "Documents can be wrong," she said dismissively. "And until we confirm the boundaries ourselves, this lake stays open to everyone." Sarah felt a surge of anger bubbling inside her. She planted herself firmly between Karen and the lake, refusing to let them proceed. "Get off my property," she said, her voice rising. "I'm not asking again." For a moment, there was silence. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Karen did something Sarah never expected, something that would haunt her for days to come. Reaching into her purse, Karen pulled out a small handgun. The sight of it sent a jolt of fear coursing through Sarah's body. Her breath hitched as Karen raised the weapon, pointing it directly at her. "This lake belongs to us, not you," Karen hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Now move, or I swear I'll—" She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she stood there, gripping the gun tightly, her knuckles white. Sarah froze, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stay calm. Slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, keeping her movements deliberate and controlled. "I'm calling the police," she said firmly, meeting Karen's gaze despite the terror clawing at her chest. Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of uncertainty in them. But the woman quickly masked it, tightening her grip on the gun. "Go ahead," she spat. "See if they care about your little lake." Sarah dialed 911, her hand shaking slightly as she explained the situation to the operator. She kept her voice steady, even though her heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself think. As she spoke, Karen began pacing back and forth, muttering under her breath. The two men with her looked uneasy, exchanging nervous glances, but saying nothing. Minutes felt like hours as they waited for the authorities to arrive. Finally, the distant wail of sirens broke the tense silence. Karen hesitated, then lowered the gun, shoving it back into her purse. Without another word, she turned and stormed off, disappearing into the trees with her companions close behind. When the police arrived, Sarah recounted the entire ordeal, her voice still quivering with emotion wafting away. Officers searched the area, but found no trace of Karen or the men. Still shaken, Sarah gave her statement and handed over footage from her security cameras as evidence. That night, lying awake in bed, Sarah replayed the scene over and over in her mind. Karen had crossed a line, one that couldn't be ignored. Whatever happened next, Sarah knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't let fear dictate her life. This was her home, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her, not even someone as unhinged as Karen. The arrival of the police marked a turning point in Sarah's battle with Karen, but it didn't bring immediate relief. Officers quickly secured the area, their flashlights cutting through the dark as they searched for any sign of Karen or her accomplices. Though the trio had vanished into the night, Sarah's security cameras had captured everything: their faces, their movements, and most damning of all, Karen brandishing the gun. With this evidence in hand, the officers assured Sarah that they would take swift action. Karen's arrest came the next morning. Police showed up at her door early, catching her off guard. She protested loudly, claiming she'd done nothing wrong. But the footage told a different story. Handcuffed and escorted to a patrol car, Karen looked both furious and humiliated as neighbors peeked out of their windows to watch. News of the incident spread like wildfire through the community, leaving many residents shocked. Some felt vindicated, believing Karen had finally gone too far, while others remained conflicted, unsure how to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the image of her wielding a weapon. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself at the center of attention. Reporters descended on the neighborhood, eager to cover the bizarre feud over a private lake. Headlines blared phrases like HOA president arrested after pulling gun in property dispute, and neighborly spat turns dangerous. While the media circus was overwhelming, Sarah handled it with grace, speaking only when necessary and focusing on the facts. "This isn't about me versus Karen," she told one reporter during a brief interview. "It's about standing up for what's right and protecting my home." As Karen faced legal consequences, charges of trespassing, brandishing a firearm, and harassment, the neighborhood began to fracture further. Those who had blindly supported Karen started distancing themselves, embarrassed by their association with her increasingly erratic behavior. Others admitted they had always suspected something was off about her, but hadn't wanted to speak up. A few loyalists remained, defending Karen as a victim of circumstances, but their numbers dwindled rapidly. At the next HOA meeting, emotions ran high. Without Karen leading the charge, the group seemed lost, unsure how to move forward. When Sarah attended to address the board, she was met with a mix of hostility, guilt, and quiet respect. Holding up copies of her deed and survey maps, she calmly reiterated her legal ownership of the lake. This time, no one challenged her. The room fell silent as she explained the toll Karen's actions had taken, not just on her, but on the entire community. By the end of her speech, Even some of Karen's former supporters nodded reluctantly, acknowledging that the dispute had spiraled out of control. Despite the progress, Sarah knew the scars wouldn't heal overnight. Trust had been broken, friendships strained, and the once idyllic neighborhood now carried an undercurrent of tension. Still, there were glimmers of hope. Several neighbors approached Sarah after the meeting to apologize for not supporting her sooner. One elderly couple brought her a basket of homemade cookies, thanking her for staying strong despite everything. Another offered to help clean up the damage around her property. These small gestures reminded Sarah that not everyone had turned against her, and that rebuilding might be possible. Meanwhile, Karen's life unraveled further. In addition to facing criminal charges, she was forced to resign from her position as HOA president. The board implemented new rules to prevent similar disputes in the future, including stricter guidelines for resolving property conflicts. Karen became a pariah in the community, shunned by those who had once admired her. Some whispered that justice had been served, while others quietly pitied her downfall. For Sarah, the aftermath was bittersweet. On one hand, she had proven her case beyond doubt, reclaiming her peace and dignity. On the other, the experience had left its mark, teaching her lessons about resilience, boundaries, and the lengths some people will go to impose their will. As she stood on her dock one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she felt a renewed sense of gratitude for her home, her strength, and the knowledge that sometimes doing the right thing means enduring the hardest fights. With Karen out of the picture and legal clarity firmly established, Sarah thought the worst was behind her. But the fallout from the entire ordeal continued to ripple through the neighborhood, leaving lasting changes in its wake. The HOA board, eager to distance themselves from the controversy, held an emergency meeting to address the chaos Karen had caused. This time, Sarah wasn't met with hostility or skepticism. Instead, she was greeted with quiet respect and even a few awkward apologies. At the meeting, Sarah presented her property documents once again, this time without interruption. The room was unusually subdued as she explained how the dispute had escalated due to misinformation and unchecked aggression. She emphasized that while disagreements were inevitable in any community, they should always be resolved peacefully and within the bounds of the law. Her words resonated with many attendees, who nodded in agreement, clearly shaken by the events that had unfolded. One neighbor stood up and publicly apologized on behalf of the HOA, acknowledging that they had failed to mediate fairly earlier. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot to Sarah after months of tension. Karen, meanwhile, faced mounting consequences for her actions. In court, she tried to argue that she had acted out of frustration and never intended to harm anyone. However, the video footage showing her pointing a gun at Sarah painted a damning picture. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing, calling her behavior reckless and dangerous. Karen was fined heavily, ordered to attend anger management classes, and prohibited from setting foot near Sarah's property. For someone who had once thrived on control, the restrictions felt like a personal defeat. Some neighbors whispered that the punishment fit the crime, while others quietly debated whether it went far enough. Either way, Karen's reputation was irreparably tarnished. Back in the neighborhood, life slowly began returning to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. The signs declaring community lake access were removed, and the HOA implemented stricter rules about respecting private property lines. New leadership took over the board, promising transparency and fairness moving forward. While some residents still harbored lingering resentment towards Sarah, most people seemed ready to put the drama behind them. A few even reached out to mend fences, inviting her to block parties or casual get-togethers. Sarah appreciated these attempts at reconciliation, though she remained cautious, knowing trust would take time to rebuild. Despite the progress, reminders of the conflict lingered. Every now and then, Sarah would notice graffiti scratched onto her mailbox or find flyers criticizing her scattered around the neighborhood. These acts of defiance came not from Karen herself. She was too busy dealing with her legal troubles, but from a handful of loyalists who refused to let go of their grudges. Still, such incidents became fewer and farther between as the weeks passed, suggesting that the tide was finally turning in Sarah's favor. One day, as Sarah walked along the edge of her lake, she spotted something unexpected: a bouquet of wildflowers resting near the shoreline. Attached to it was a note that read, "We're sorry for everything. Please forgive us." There was no signature, but Sarah suspected it came from one of her quieter neighbors who had been too afraid to stand up to Karen before. Touched by the gesture, she placed the flowers on her dining table, a symbol of hope amidst the turmoil. By the end of the summer, Sarah could finally breathe easier. The constant fear and stress that had weighed on her shoulders for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and resilience. She realized that while the battle with Karen had been exhausting, it had also taught her valuable lessons about standing firm in the face of adversity. More importantly, it reminded her why she loved her home: the peace, the beauty, and the freedom to live life on her own terms. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, Sarah knew she had emerged stronger than ever. And as she looked out at the shimmering waters of her lake, she allowed herself to smile, knowing she had fought and won for what truly mattered. Months had passed since the chaos of Karen's arrest and the neighborhood's slow return to normalcy. The once idyllic community was still healing, but Sarah noticed subtle changes everywhere she looked. Neighbors who had been divided by the feud were now making an effort to reconnect, inviting each other over for barbecues, organizing weekend cleanup days, and even reviving the annual fall festival that had been canceled the previous year. While some relationships had been irreparably damaged, others blossomed in unexpected ways. For Sarah, it was a reminder that life moves forward, even after the hardest storms. On a crisp autumn evening, Sarah found herself sitting on her dock once again, watching the golden light of sunset dance across the surface of the lake. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. It was hard to believe that just months ago, this very spot had been the center of such turmoil. Now it felt like her sanctuary once more, a place where she could escape, reflect, and find peace. She sipped a cup of tea, letting the quiet soothe her soul. Karen's absence loomed large in the neighborhood, though not always in obvious ways. Some residents admitted they missed her energy and organizational skills, while others were relieved to have a fresh start without her constant micromanaging. Rumors occasionally surfaced about how she was coping with her legal troubles and public humiliation, but Sarah tried not to dwell on them. What mattered most was that Karen no longer posed a threat to her or her property. The restraining order ensured that Sarah's home remained hers alone, free from intrusion or intimidation. Still, the experience had left its mark on Sarah. She had entered this chapter of her life seeking serenity, only to find herself thrust into a battle she never imagined fighting. Yet through it all, she discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. Standing up to Karen wasn't easy. It required courage, patience, and unwavering determination, but it taught Sarah the value of protecting what truly mattered. Her lake, her home, and her peace were worth every moment of struggle. As time went on, Sarah also noticed something else: a renewed appreciation for her neighbors who had stood by her side. They weren't perfect. No one was. But their support during the darkest days reminded her of the importance of community. One neighbor, Lisa, became a close friend, often stopping by to chat or help with yard work. Another, Mr. Henderson, surprised her with a handmade birdhouse he'd crafted for her lakeside trees. These small acts of kindness restored Sarah's faith in humanity, proving that even in the face of conflict, good people could rise above. The neighborhood itself began to feel different too. With new leadership at the helm of the HOA, there was a greater emphasis on collaboration rather than control. Meetings were shorter, friendlier, and focused on practical solutions rather than petty grievances. Residents seemed more willing to listen to one another, fostering a sense of unity that had been missing before. Even the shared spaces, the playground, the walking trails, and the park, felt brighter, as if the weight of resentment had lifted along with Karen's departure. For Sarah, the ordeal also sparked a deeper connection to her property. She spent weekends planting flowers around the lake, installing a bench overlooking the water, and creating a small garden filled with native plants. Each improvement felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, transforming the scars of the past into something beautiful. On especially clear nights, she would sit outside under a blanket of stars, feeling grateful for the life she had built and fought so hard to protect. Looking back, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how far she'd come. The woman who had once hesitated to confront Karen was now someone who knew exactly where to draw the line. The experience hadn't just changed her circumstances, it had changed her. She was stronger, wiser, and more resilient, qualities she hoped would serve her well in the future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the lake in shades of amber and violet, Sarah smiled softly to herself. Life wasn't perfect. Few things ever were, but it was hers. And that, she realized, was enough.